The moment I saw that signature blue velvet box lying under my neighbor's dusty bed, my world did not crumble. It simply shifted into audit mode. My husband claimed he was fixing her sink out of kindness, but nobody repairs plumbing and leaves a $50,000 necklace in another woman's bedroom. He thinks I am a docile sheep who signs checks, but he is about to discover that I became rich by hunting professional frauds far smarter than him. My name is Valerie, and if there is one thing a career in forensic auditing has taught me, it is that numbers never lie, but people almost always do. I had just returned from a grueling week in Zurich, my body aching from a 14-hour flight and the lingering stiffness of too many boardroom chairs. The silence of our penthouse should have been welcoming, yet it felt heavy, like the air before a thunderstorm. I dropped my keys on the console table and checked my phone, finding a text from Preston. He claimed he was next door at Sienna's apartment, helping her fix a catastrophic pipe burst that threatened to flood the building. It was a classic Preston move. He loved to play the savior, the capable man of the house, even though he could barely change a light bulb without calling for praise. I decided to be the supportive wife, grabbing a bottle of vintage Pinot Noir from the cellar to turn a plumbing disaster into a neighborly dinner. I walked down the hall, the bottle cool in my hand, and found Sienna's front door unlocked. I pushed it open, expecting the clang of metal on metal or the rushing sound of water. Instead, I heard the unmistakable sound of giggling drifting down the hallway. It was not the sound of a woman whose apartment was being destroyed by water. It was the sound of a woman being entertained. I did not call out. My training kicked in immediately. I moved silently across the cheap laminate flooring, my eyes scanning the room for anomalies. The living room was a disaster of thrown pillows and fashion magazines, but one detail stood out with glaring clarity. Preston's handmade Italian loafers, worth more than Sienna's entire living room set, were kicked haphazardly against her beige polyester sofa. He never left those shoes anywhere but his cedar-lined closet. I approached the bedroom door, which was left slightly ajar. Through the gap, the scene unfolded with high-definition cruelty. My eyes landed first on the floor. There, half hidden by a dust bunny under the bed frame, was a small box wrapped in signature blue velvet. It was the exact shade of the packaging for the custom necklace Preston had sworn was delayed in transit, the gift for our 10th wedding anniversary which had passed 2 weeks ago. I shifted my gaze upward. The necklace was not lost in transit. It was draped around Sienna's neck, the diamonds catching the dim light of the bedside lamp. She was lying back against the headboard, and my husband was hovering over her, his fingers tracing the line of the chain. "You have no idea how heavy it is," Preston said, his voice dripping with a mock exhaustion I had never heard him use with me. "Living with her is like living with a spreadsheet. Valerie is just an emotionless ATM. Sienna let out a breathy laugh, toying with the buttons of his shirt. "But a very generous ATM. Right? Just wait until the transfer clears," Preston murmured, leaning down to kiss her collarbone right next to the diamonds I paid for. "Once she wires the capital for the foundation, I am done. I'll file the papers and we can finally breathe." My heart did not race. My hands did not shake. A cold, clinical calm washed over me. This was no longer a marriage. It was a crime scene, and I was the lead investigator. I pulled my phone from my pocket, silenced the shutter sound, and positioned the lens through the crack in the door. I took 3 rapid photos, ensuring the focus captured his face, her face, and the necklace in a single frame. I pocketed the phone and backed away, stepping exactly where I had stepped before to avoid creaking floorboards. I slipped out of the apartment, closing the door until the latch clicked softly into place. Back in my own penthouse, I placed the unopened bottle of wine on the marble counter. I did not cry. Tears were a waste of hydration and energy. I sat down at the kitchen island and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark room as I logged into our home security mainframe and my banking interfaces. I cracked my knuckles and began the protocol I reserved for my worst enemies. It was time for a complete liquidation of risk assets. To understand the betrayal, one must first understand the parasite attached to it. Preston comes from one of those distinguished New York families that can trace its lineage back to the founding fathers, but unfortunately for him, the family fortune evaporated 2 generations ago. He has spent his entire adult life trading on a last name that opens doors but cannot pay the cover charge. He lists his occupation on tax forms as a social entrepreneur, a vague title that allows him to attend galas and host roundtables while I quietly pay for the bespoke suits on his back and the hand-rolled cigars he puffs on while pontificating about saving the world. Looking back, I can see the architecture of his hustle with painful clarity. He hunted me. I was 24, fresh out of graduate school, and hungry for success. Preston was 10 years older, dripping with the kind of casual, old money charm that you cannot learn in a classroom. He made me feel like an outsider who had been granted a special pass to the VIP section of life. He convinced me that I needed his connections to rise, when in reality, he needed my paycheck to survive. He loves to introduce me at parties as my brilliant wife, the accountant, diminishing my career to simple bookkeeping. It is a calculated insult. I am not an accountant. I am the Senior Director of Forensic Audit at Obsidian Analytics. My days are not spent balancing checkbooks. They are spent tracking illicit fund flows, exposing embezzlement schemes, and hunting down white-collar criminals who think they are smarter than the system. It is ironic that while I spent 10 hours a day analyzing the fraudulent behaviors of strangers, I failed to audit the man sleeping in my bed. "Your work is so dry," Preston used to say, waving a glass of scotch I had paid for. "It lacks soul, Valerie. You look at numbers and see limits. I see possibilities. I see art." His art consisted of vanity projects that hemorrhaged money, a gallery that never sold a painting, a tech incubator that never hatched an idea, and now, this foundation? Then came Sienna. She moved into the apartment across the hall 6 months ago. She is 20-something, lists her job as an Instagram life coach, and yet somehow always seemed to have trouble making rent on time. She is the breathing definition of a damsel in distress. It started small. A flat tire in the garage, a pilot light that went out, a heavy package she could not lift. I feel so helpless with these things," Sienna had said one evening in the hallway, clutching her robe tight and looking up at Preston through her eyelashes. "Could you maybe take a look? Please, I was the one who nudged him forward. Go help her. Preston, be a gentleman." I was not stupid, just exhausted. I was so busy working 80-hour weeks to maintain the penthouse, the country club memberships, and the luxury cars Preston demanded that I simply did not have the energy to be suspicious. I outsourced the emotional labor of neighborliness to him because I was too busy funding our existence. Now, sitting in the dark, the equation finally balanced in my head. Preston does not love Sienna. He is incapable of loving anyone other than himself. What he loves is the way she looks at him. When Sienna looks at Preston, she sees a savior, a wealthy benefactor, a god. When I look at Preston, I see a liability. I see a man who has not paid a single utility bill in 5 years. I stopped looking at him with worship in my eyes a long time ago, and for a narcissist like Preston, that is the ultimate unforgivable sin. He did not cheat because he wanted sex. He cheated because he wanted an audience that would applaud his performance without asking to see the receipts. I opened the digital ledger for the supplementary American Express card I had issued to Preston for what we agreed were absolute emergencies. The screen populated with a cascade of transactions that were decidedly non-emergency. He had categorized a series of charges as renovation materials in our shared budget app, tagging a local hardware supply store. However, forensic auditing requires looking past the user-inputted data to the merchant category codes. I expanded the transaction details. The $300 he claimed was for copper piping was actually a charge at Le Jardin, the most expensive French bistro in the district. The $400 for insulation was billed to a luxury day spa 2 blocks away. He was not buying drywall. He was buying couples massages. I moved to the joint checking account. For the past 6 months, there had been a recurring cash withdrawal of $3,200 on the first of every month. Preston had labeled these as anonymous donations to the orphanage. I pulled up the rental listing for the apartment complex we lived in. The current market rate for a one-bedroom unit like Sienna's was exactly $3,200. He was not feeding orphans. He was keeping a roof over his mistress's head with my salary. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I activated the remote tracking software I had installed on his phone and the onboard GPS of his Range Rover. I overlaid his location history with his calendar. The weekend he claimed he was at a green energy summit in Albany. The car had never left the state. Instead, it had been parked for 48 hours at a boutique resort in the Catskills. The timestamps showed he was ordering room service at 2 a.m. when he had texted me goodnight, claiming to be exhausted from networking. Then I found the transaction that made my blood run cold. It was a receipt for a high-end farmhouse sink, imported from Italy, valued at $4,000. It had not been charged to the credit card or the joint account. It had been paid for using a wire transfer from my private retirement savings. He had guessed my security questions, likely the name of my first pet, which he knew, and accessed the account I had been building since I was 22. He was stealing my future to renovate hers. The front door beeped. I minimized the windows instantly, leaving only a spreadsheet of a generic household budget on the screen. Preston walked in, looking theatrically disheveled. He had smeared a streak of black grease across his forehead, and his sleeves were rolled up. My God, Valerie. He sighed, dropping his keys with a heavy clatter. The plumbing. It was a complete nightmare. I had to replace the entire U-bend trap. I've been wrestling with sludge for 3 hours. I turned the swivel chair slowly to face him. I did not offer him a drink. I did not offer him a towel. You are a saint, Preston, I said, my voice steady and devoid of warmth. Most men would have just called a professional, but you. You really like to get your hands dirty, don't you? Well, he stammered, clearly unsettled by my intense stare. You know me. I like to fix things. It's what I do. Yes, I replied, smiling just enough to show teeth but not enough to reach my eyes. You certainly are fixing things. He hurried to the shower to wash off the fake grease. As soon as the water started running, I picked up my phone and dialed Marcus, my lead analyst at Obsidian Analytics. I need a full scrub on the Preston Future Foundation, I said the moment he answered. Deep dive, look for shell patterns, circular transactions, and vendor verification. I want to know where every single cent has gone in the last 12 months. Marcus called back in less than 20 minutes. The report confirmed my hypothesis. The foundation was a hollow shell. There were no scholarships, no clean water initiatives, no art grants. The funds were being funneled into a limited liability company registered in the Cayman Islands, which then paid out for consulting fees to an account solely controlled by Preston. It was a classic laundering scheme, clumsy and arrogant. I pieced together his endgame. He had been pushing me for weeks to invest $5 million into the foundation for a global expansion initiative. He claimed it would secure his legacy. The reality was transparent. He was not expanding. He was cashing out. He planned to take the $5 million, drain the accounts, and disappear to a non-extradition country with Sienna, leaving me with a drained bank account and a broken heart. He thought he was playing a high-stakes chess match, but he had forgotten that he was playing against the person who wrote the rulebook on capturing kings. The psychological warfare began over breakfast. Preston pushed his eggs around the plate, sighing with the weight of a man carrying the world on his cashmere-clad shoulders. He launched into his rehearsed speech about feeling emasculated by my success, claiming that he needed the $5 million seed capital not just for the foundation, but to reclaim his dignity. I just feel stifled. Val, he said, looking out the window with a practiced melancholy. I need to build something that is mine. If you really loved me, you would want me to stand on my own 2 feet. This money, it is an investment in us. I nodded, buttering my toast with deliberate slowness. I understand. You are right. Preston, I have been holding you back. The external pressure mounted later that afternoon. I encountered Sienna in the lobby. She was wearing a trench coat, but as she reached for her mail, the fabric fell open just enough to reveal the sparkle of the diamond necklace against her skin. She saw me looking and offered a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. It is so important to hold on to happiness when you find it. Don't you think? She asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Some people spend their whole lives chasing it and never realize it is right under their nose. Or someone else's. Indeed, I replied, my face a mask of polite disinterest. Happiness is often fleeting for those who do not earn it. That evening, I dropped the bait. I told Preston that I was ready to authorize the transfer of $5 million. The relief that washed over his face was pathetic. It was the look of a man who thought he had successfully pulled off the heist of the century. However, I added a condition. I insisted that we host a massive fundraising gala to announce the donation publicly, inviting every member of the high society elite he so desperately wanted to impress. He agreed instantly, his ego swelling at the prospect of an audience. Then, he delivered the final insult. He suggested that Sienna attend the gala as the foundation's new creative director. He claimed she had a fresh perspective that the organization needed. It was a brazen attempt to parade his mistress in front of me on the biggest night of his career. That is a wonderful idea, I said, suppressing the urge to vomit. In fact, I insist on taking her shopping. If she is going to represent us, she needs to look the part. My treat. The shopping trip was a masterclass in manipulation. I took Sienna to the most expensive boutique on Fifth Avenue, while she was trying on a gown that cost more than her car. I sat outside the dressing room curtain and played the part of the insecure, fading wife. I worry sometimes, I said softly to the curtain. I worry I am too boring for him, that he needs someone more exciting. Sienna took the bait hook, line, and sinker. From behind the velvet curtain, her voice came out arrogant and unfiltered. Well, honestly, Valerie Preston is a visionary. He needs a muse, not a bank manager. He needs a woman who understands his soul. Eventually, nature just takes its course. I smiled as I checked the recording app on my phone, which had captured every word clearly. You are so right, Sienna. Nature always takes its course. While they spent the next 2 days fantasizing about their future, I was finalizing their destruction. I met with my legal team in a rented office across town to draft the divorce petition, the emergency asset freeze orders, and a dossier of tax fraud evidence. Preston kept pressing for the money to be wired before the gala, but I blamed the delay on banking compliance protocols. You know how it is, I told him, adjusting his tie. The bank needs 48 hours to clear a sum of $5 million. It will hit the account exactly while you are giving your speech. It will be poetic. The night before the gala, I lay awake in bed, listening to the rhythm of Preston's breathing. He was sleeping soundly, dreaming of the millions he thought he had stolen. I turned my head and looked at him, searching for any remnant of the love I once held. There was nothing, no anger, no sadness, just a cold, clinical repulsion. I sat up, slid my wedding ring off my finger, and placed it on the nightstand. It made a hollow sound against the wood. Sleep tight, I whispered into the darkness. You are going to need the rest. My attorney, Arthur, slid the final stack of documents across the mahogany table of his office. We had spent the morning erecting a legal fortress around my assets that was impenetrable. Every stock portfolio, every property deed, and every offshore account had been triple sealed behind trusts that Preston could not touch. More importantly, We had isolated his liabilities. The mountain of debt he had accrued on his credit lines was now legally distinct from my estate. "You are absolutely certain about this clause?" Arthur asked, tapping the paper with his pen. "Once we file this, there is no going back. He will be personally liable for every cent of the tax evasion penalties." "File it," I said, my voice flat and unyielding. "I want him naked to the world." Next, I met with the technical team I had hired for the gala. These were not the hotel's standard audio-visual guys. These were digital mercenaries I used for corporate presentations when the stakes were high. I walked them through the run of show with military precision. "I need absolute accuracy," I told the lead technician, staring him down. "When I give the signal, you cut the feed from the Foundation server and switch to my laptop. There can be no lag, no buffering. I want the images high resolution and unforgiving." "We have you covered, ma'am," he assured me. "The transition will be seamless." My favorite tactical move, however, was purely personal. Using a shell company registered in Delaware, I purchased the distressed mortgage note on the apartment building where Sienna lived. She had been dodging her landlord for months, but she did not know that I was now the landlord. I had the eviction notice drafted, stamped, and ready to be served the moment the clock struck midnight. I also sent out personal invitations to a select group of VIPs. These were not Preston's friends. They were the angel investors he had charmed over the last 3 years, the dentist from Jersey he took for $50,000, the elderly widow he swindled out of $20,000. I told them the gala was an opportunity for restitution. They would be the front row of my audience, and their anger would be my weapon. I prepared a gift for Sienna to mirror the one I found under her bed. I found an identical blue velvet box. But instead of a diamond necklace, I placed a cheap plastic set of toy handcuffs inside, along with a note that simply read, "Accessories for your new life." Preston came home around noon, buzzing with manic energy. I caught him in the kitchen and handed him a document. "I need you to sign this," I said casually, pouring myself a glass of water to hide the intensity in my eyes. "It is just a standard acknowledgement of debt responsibility so the bank can clear the $5 million wire without holding it for laundering checks. It basically says you accept the funds as a loan repayment to the foundation." He did not even read it. He saw the words $5 million and scribbled his signature at the bottom. In doing so, he had just legally confessed that the foundation's debts were his personal loans. He had signed his own financial death warrant with a Mont Blanc pen I had bought him. I went upstairs to dress. For 10 years, I had worn neutrals beige, cream, soft grays to blend in, to be the subtle background to Preston's shining star. Tonight, I pulled a dress from the back of the closet that still had the tags on it. It was blood red, structural, and sharp enough to draw blood. I looked in the mirror. I did not look like a wife. I looked like a reckoning. My phone buzzed with a notification from my banking app. The mock interface was ready. It would display a processing transfer screen that looked identical to the real thing, perfect for projecting on a 20-foot screen, but not a single penny would ever move. Then, Preston's phone lit up on the vanity where he had left it while showering. I glanced at the screen. It was a text from Sienna. "I cannot wait to see the look on her face tonight. That stupid cow is about to lose it all, and we are going to be kings." I read the words, and a cold, dangerous smile touched my lips. I closed my laptop with a satisfying snap. "You are right about one thing. Sienna," I whispered to the empty room. "Tonight, there will be someone who loses everything, but it certainly will not be me." The grand ballroom of the St. Regis was suffocatingly opulent. A gold-leafed cage I had rented for the evening. Every crystal in the chandeliers, every flute of champagne, and every hors d'oeuvre circulating on silver trays had been paid for by my bank account. Yet the banner hanging above the stage read, "The Preston Future Foundation," in bold navy letters. Preston made his entrance like a returning monarch, his hand clamping firmly over mine, beaming at the sea of tuxedos and gowns. However, even as he accepted the handshakes of the city's elite, I felt the subtle twitch in his palm every time his eyes darted toward the corner of the room. There stood Sienna, wearing the emerald silk gown I had purchased, looking like a trophy waiting to be collected. We were immediately swarmed by the sycophants, the social climbers who smell money the way sharks smell blood. "Preston, old boy, is it true?" a banker asked, clapping my husband on the back. $5 million in seed capital, that is a game changer. "It is all about the vision," Preston replied, puffing out his chest. "Valerie and I we believe in leaving the world better than we found it." The hypocrisy was so thick I could taste it like bile. I excused myself to grab a sparkling water, but my path was blocked by Sienna. She held a glass of Cabernet in a grip that looked unstable. She lunged forward with a theatrical stumble, and the dark red liquid splashed across the skirt of my structural red dress. The gasps from the nearby guests were audible. "Oh my God!" Sienna shrieked, pressing a hand to her mouth, though her eyes were dancing with malice. "I am so clumsy. I am so sorry. Valerie." Did I ruin it? I looked down at the stain, which blended almost perfectly with the crimson fabric of my gown, then looked up at her with a calmness that unnerved her. I did not flinch. I did not scold. "Do not worry, Sienna," I said, my voice smooth and loud enough for the circle around us to hear. "It is just a dress. When things get dirty, I simply throw them away." Sienna's smile faltered, but I had already moved on. I scanned the back of the room. There, clustered near the exit, were the special guests I had personally invited. There was the elderly Mrs. Higgins, clutching her purse, and Dr. Eris, the dentist. They were not mingling. They were staring at Preston with a mixture of confusion and brewing rage. They were the victims of his previous investment opportunities, and they were the kindling for the fire I was about to light. The lights dimmed, signaling the main event. Preston bounded up the stairs to the stage, grabbing the microphone with the ease of a born narcissist. He launched into his speech, a rehearsed monologue about sacrifice, global impact, and the burden of leadership. He spoke of digging wells in places he could not locate on a map and building schools that existed only in his imagination. "But I could not do this alone," Preston said, his voice dropping to a husky, emotional register. "I need to invite my partner, my rock, the woman who makes this all possible. Valerie, darling, please join me." The spotlight swung to me. I took a breath, adjusted the strap of my dress, and walked toward the stage. The applause was polite, but the tension in the room was palpable. I climbed the stairs and stood next to him. He reached out to hug me, whispering in my ear away from the mic. "Just smile and hand over the check. Val, do not make this weird." I pulled away from him, stepping directly into the center of the spotlight. I took the microphone from the stand. I did not look at the check for $5 million that was sitting on the podium. I looked out at the audience, locking eyes with Sienna in the front row, then shifting my gaze to the angry group in the back. "Thank you, Preston," I said, my voice booming through the hall with crystal clarity. "My husband speaks so passionately about fixing the world, about building futures, about repairs." Preston nodded, clapping slowly, expecting a toast. "But before I sign this check for $5 million, I continued, my tone hardening into steel, "I think it is important that we all see exactly what this foundation has been fixing for the past year." I raised my hand and snapped my fingers at the technical booth. "Roll the tape," I commanded. Preston froze, his smile twitching as the massive screen behind us flickered to life. He reached for my arm, a look of panic flashing in his eyes. "Valerie, what are you doing?" he hissed. "I am conducting an audit. Preston," I replied, my voice amplified for everyone to hear. "And you are coming up short." The massive LED screen behind me did not display the benevolent blue and white logo of the Preston Future Foundation. Instead, the pixels rearranged themselves to form a stark, black and white title slide that read, Internal Audit Report Project Sync Repair. A collective murmur rippled through the ballroom, the sound of 300 wealthy people simultaneously realizing that the script had been flipped. I clicked the remote in my hand with the precision of a sniper pulling a trigger. The first slide appeared. It was a high-resolution montage of photos taken by the private investigator I had hired. There was Preston, shirtless by a pool at the Amangiri Resort, holding a cocktail. Next to him, laughing with her head thrown back, was Sienna, beneath the photos. I had superimposed the bank records with red connecting lines. "As you can see here," I said, my voice steady and amplified. "On October 14th, a withdrawal of $6,000 was made from the Foundation's account for emergency relief supplies. The only relief provided, however, was a couple's massage and a poolside cabana in Utah." The room erupted in gasps. Preston stood frozen beside me, his face draining of all color until he looked like a wax figure melting under the stage lights. He began making frantic slashing motions across his throat, signaling the tech booth to cut the feed. "Turn it off!" he hissed at the darkness, panic cracking his voice. "Technical difficulties, cut the power." But the screen did not go black. My team had locked the system. I clicked again. The screen filled with scanned receipts, magnified for clarity. A $5,000 invoice for a Hermes handbag, a $2,000 bill for a dinner at Per Se, a $3,000 charge for a weekend at the Plaza Hotel. These expenses were categorized in the ledger as operational logistics and donor outreach, I explained, using the cool, detached tone I reserved for boardroom presentations. However, upon cross-referencing with the merchant category codes, we find that the funds were actually allocated to luxury retail and hospitality services. This represents a gross misappropriation of donor capital. Preston looked like he was about to vomit. The donors in the back of the room were now standing, pointing fingers and shouting, but I was not finished. I clicked one more time. The image of the blue velvet box lying in the dust under Sienna's bed filled the 20-foot screen. It was sharp, undeniable, and pathetic. Next to it, I projected the photo of Sienna wearing the diamond necklace, zoomed in so every facet of the stones caught the light. I stepped to the edge of the stage and pointed a single, accusing finger down at the front row, where Sienna was sitting, shrinking into her chair as if she could disappear into the floor. "And here," I announced, "is our new creative director. That necklace she is wearing, that is not a family heirloom. That is the $50,000 donation many of you thought was going to build a library. She is literally wearing your charity around her neck," Preston snapped. With a guttural roar, he lunged at me, his hands reaching for the microphone, his eyes wide with desperate rage. You lying witch!" he screamed. He never reached me. Two burly security guards, men I had paid triple their usual rate to ensure my safety, stepped out from the shadows of the curtains and intercepted him. They restrained him easily, pinning his arms behind his back as he thrashed impotently. "Let me go, she is lying," Preston shouted, spit flying from his mouth. "I never lie about numbers, Preston," I said calmly. "And I certainly do not lie about assets. But speaking of lies, let us hear one final piece of evidence." I signaled the sound engineer. The audio file from the dressing room began to play over the ballroom's surround sound system. The quality was crystal clear. Honestly, Valerie Preston is a visionary. But let's be real. Sienna's voice echoed through the hall, dripping with arrogance. "He is just a useful fool with a rich wife. Once I secure my position, I will handle the money. He is too stupid to notice." The silence that followed was absolute. Preston stopped struggling. He turned his head slowly, looking down at Sienna with an expression of shattered disbelief. Sienna refused to meet his eyes, staring down at her lap, her face burning with the shame of 1,000 judging glares. The mask had not just slipped. I had ripped it off and set it on fire. I clicked the remote one final time, and the screen behind me shifted from the embarrassing photos to a stark financial spreadsheet. The numbers were bold and red. It was a summary of Preston's personal liquidity, or rather, the lack thereof. "The slide you are looking at shows Preston's current solvency," I announced, my voice cutting through the rising murmur of the crowd. "As you can see, his net worth is negative $42,000. And regarding the $5 million investment I was scheduled to make tonight, consider it permanently canceled." The silence in the room shattered. Preston, who had been restrained by the guards, suddenly found a burst of hysterical strength. He thrashed against their grip, his face contorted into a mask of pure desperation. "She is lying," he screamed, his voice cracking with panic. "My wife is having a psychotic break. She is jealous. She is making this all up because she knows I am leaving her. Do not listen to her." But his shouts were drowned out by the angry roar from the back of the room. My secret guests, the victims of his past schemes, stood up in unison. Dr. Eris, usually a mild-mannered man, pointed a trembling finger at the stage. "You told me my $50,000 was going to a tech startup," he bellowed, his face turning purple. "I want my money back tonight. Preston, or I am calling the district attorney right now. And my 20,000 misses," Higgins shrieked, waving her cane in the air. "You thief, you charming, lying thief." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Sienna had grabbed her clutch and was attempting to slink away toward the side exit, trying to make herself invisible. She almost made it to the door before the hotel manager, a man I had briefed earlier, stepped into her path with a clipboard in hand. "Excuse me, miss?" the manager said loudly enough for the nearby tables to hear. "We have an outstanding bill for the 3 bottles of Dom Perignon and the caviar service you ordered to the dressing room earlier. The card on file was declined. We will need an alternative form of payment before you leave the premises." I turned back to Preston, who was now sweating profusely under the stage lights. I walked over to him, stopping just out of spitting range. "You told me you were over at her apartment to fix a sink, remember?" I asked, tilting my head slightly. "Congratulations, Preston. Now you can become a real plumber. You are going to need the hourly wage to pay off these people." He stared at me, his eyes wide and hollow. I leaned in closer to deliver the next blow. "Oh, and do not bother going home to pack," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that was somehow louder than a shout. "I sold the penthouse this morning. The new owners take possession at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. Your keycard has already been deactivated." The fight went out of him instantly. His knees buckled, and if the guards had not been holding him, he would have collapsed. He slumped forward, his tuxedo jacket bunching up around his neck, and looked up at me with tears streaming down his face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a pathetic, sniveling cowardice. "Valerie, Val, please," he sobbed, the sound echoing through the microphone I still held. I made a mistake. It was her. It was Sienna. She seduced me. Val. She made me do it. I never wanted to hurt you." She twisted my head around. A screech erupted from the side of the room. Sienna, abandoning her argument with the manager, stormed toward the stage, her face twisted in fury. "You spineless worm!" she screamed, pointing a manicured nail at him. "You told me you were leaving her. You told me she was a bore and a frump. Do not pin this on me. You broke fraud." "You ruined everything!" Preston yelled back, trying to lunge at her. "You greedy little leech!" The ballroom had turned into a theater of the absurd. The guests watched in horrified fascination as the 2 people who had thought themselves superior to everyone else tore each other apart like starving dogs. I stood in the center of the storm, untouched and unbothered. A profound sense of lightness washed over me. The anger I had carried for weeks evaporated, leaving only a clean, cool sense of closure. I looked down at my left hand. The diamond wedding ring felt heavy, a shackle I had worn for too long. I slid it off my finger, feeling the metal scrape against my skin one last time. I tossed it through the air. It hit Preston's chest with a dull thud and bounced onto the floor at his feet. "Consider this my final charitable donation," I said, my voice final and absolute. "Sell it. It might be enough to hire a mediocre defense attorney." The doors at the far end of the ballroom flew open, but this time it was not for a waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres. A squad of 6 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit marched in, their badges glinting under the chandeliers. I had submitted the digital dossier to the district attorney's office exactly 8 hours ago, ensuring the warrant would be signed and executed right at the peak of the evening's festivities. They moved through the crowd with purpose, parting the sea of stunned socialites until they reached the stage. "Preston, you are under arrest for embezzlement, wire fraud, and grand larceny," the lead officer announced, his voice carrying over the silence of the room. No, please," Preston stammered, his hands shaking violently as the officer spun him around. "This is a misunderstanding I can explain. I just need to call my accountant." The click of the handcuffs was the loudest sound in the room. Around us, dozens of smartphones were raised high, recording every second of his disgrace. The man who lived for the camera was finally getting the coverage he deserved, live-streamed directly to the social circles he had tried so desperately to impress. His image as the benevolent philanthropist did not just crack, it shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Sienna tried to inch away again, but a female officer intercepted her. She was not being arrested, but she was not leaving with her prize. "Ma'am, the necklace you are wearing is listed as evidence in a federal investigation regarding the misappropriation of charitable funds," the officer said firmly, holding out an evidence bag. "I need you to remove it. Now." But it was a gift," Sienna whimpered, her fingers trembling as she reached for the clasp. "He gave it to me. You cannot just take it." "Hand it over," the officer commanded. Sienna unclasped the diamonds, her face burning crimson as she dropped the heavy necklace into the plastic bag. She looked naked without it, stripped of the borrowed status she had flaunted in my face just an hour before. I did not stay to watch them drag Preston out. I took the elevator up to my suite and walked out onto the private balcony. The night air was crisp and bit at my exposed arms, but the cold felt cleansing. I looked down at the street entrance of the hotel. From this height, Preston looked like a toy soldier as he was shoved into the back of a squad car, the red and blue strobe lights painting the pavement. A few yards away, Sienna stood on the curb. She was not going home. My property management company, acting on the foreclosure authority I had acquired, had executed an emergency eviction order due to 6 months of unpaid rent. Her key fob had been deactivated, and her belongings had been boxed up and left on the sidewalk by the service entrance. She stood there, shivering in her expensive gown, surrounded by cardboard boxes, crying into her phone to a contact list that I knew was rapidly blocking her number. I checked my own phone. The social media fallout was instantaneous. The same friends who had been drinking Preston's champagne an hour ago were now scrubbing their profiles. Photos of them with Preston were vanishing by the second, replaced by self-righteous posts condemning fraud and praising honesty. They were rats fleeing a sinking ship, and I watched them swim away with amusement. My attorney, Arthur, sent a text message that popped up on my screen. "Given the criminal charges and the video evidence of adultery, the prenup is ironclad and the divorce will be expedited. You will be a free woman in less than 30 days. A second message arrived from the CEO of Obsidian Analytics. "Valerie, I just saw the news. This is the most efficient, ruthless, and thorough audit I have ever witnessed. Absolute masterpiece." I turned back into the room and picked up the hotel phone. "Room service," I said when the operator answered. "I would like a bottle of your finest vintage champagne and a cheeseburger." Medium rare. Hold the fries. I sat on the velvet sofa, watching the city lights of New York twinkle in the distance. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally felt mine again. I realized then that I was not grieving. Losing Preston was not a loss. It was like surgical removal. I had not lost a husband. I had simply cut out a malignant tumor that had been draining the life out of me for years. And now, finally, the healing could begin. The morning sun felt different today. It was sharper, cleaner, as if the smog of the last 10 years had finally lifted. I drove to the penthouse one last time, not to reminisce, but to supervise the extraction of the infection. The movers were efficient, boxing up the remnants of Preston's life, the humidors, the golf clubs he never used, the awards he had bought for himself at charity auctions. I walked down the hallway to the neighboring apartment. The door was propped open by the cleaning crew. I stepped inside the empty space where Sienna had lived. It smelled of stale perfume and desperation. I walked into the kitchenette and looked at the sink. A single drop of water fell from the faucet. Then, another. Preston had claimed to spend hours fixing it, but it was still leaking. It was the perfect monument to his existence, a lot of noise, a lot of drama, and absolutely no competence. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I looked at the screen. It was a collect call from the Metropolitan Correctional Facility. I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then slid my thumb to accept. Valerie. Val. Thank God. Preston's voice crackled over the line, frantic and stripped of its usual smooth baritone. It is a nightmare in here. The food is inedible. The smell. Val, please. The judge set bail at $100,000. You have that kind of cash in your checking account. Just get me out. I promise. I promise I will change. We can go to counseling. I will get a real job. I listened to him beg, waiting for a spark of pity or anger to ignite in my chest. But there was nothing. Just a vast, cool silence. I was not angry at him anymore. I was simply finished with him. You always wanted to live a life full of drama and art. Preston, I said, my voice calm and steady. Prison is a fantastic place for you to write your memoirs. You finally have a captive audience. Valerie, do not do this. You cannot leave me here. Goodbye, Preston. I ended the call. Then, with a few taps of my thumb, I blocked the number. I blocked his email. I blocked his family. I severed the last rotting thread that connected me to him. I left the building and met my real estate agent at a bistro downtown. She looked nervous as she slid a thick stack of documents across the table. Are you sure about this? Valerie? She asked. The Malibu property is quite isolated. Preston always said it was too far from the party scene. Preston does not get a vote anymore, I replied, uncapping my pen. I want the ocean view. I want the quiet. I want the peace. I signed the papers with a flourish. The beach villa I had dreamed of for 5 years was finally mine. From there, I went to the loading dock where the movers were waiting with the truck full of Preston's belongings, 40 boxes of Italian suits, silk ties, and designer shoes. Storage Unit B. Ma'am, the driver asked. No, I said, smiling. Take them to the Second Chance Initiative downtown. It is a charity that provides professional clothing to homeless men trying to get back into the workforce. Let us hope these suits bring the new owners more integrity than the last one had. Back in my hotel suite, I stood before the full-length mirror. The woman staring back at me was no longer the tired, anxious wife trying to prop up a fragile man's ego. The lines of worry around my eyes had softened. I looked powerful. I looked wealthy. I looked free. My laptop pinged with a new email. It was from the board of directors at a massive international conglomerate. They were formally offering me the position of head of global financial investigations. The salary was astronomical, but the money did not matter. It was the challenge. They wanted me to hunt down corruption on a global scale. I picked up my purse and walked out of the hotel. As I stepped onto the sidewalk, The midday sun hit my face, warm and blindingly bright. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that finally belonged only to me. I thought about the blue velvet box I had found under the bed. At the time, I thought it was the container of my destruction. Now, I realized it was a gift. That little blue box had been the key that unlocked the cage I did not even know I was living in. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's chat. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please subscribe to the channel Lily Revenge Stories, like this video, and hit that hype button to help this story reach more people.